The annual BRICS summit is on the horizon. From August the 22nd to 24th, South Africa will be hosting the annual event in Johannesburg. This year's summit will focus on the African continent. Heads of 54 African states have been invited, setting the conference apart from previous ones. Prior to the meeting, more than 40 countries queued up to join the BRICS over the past few months. And shifting away from the dollar is a hot topic among many countries. So what lies ahead during this year's BRICS summit? What deliverables are in store for Africa, and what does China plan to do to boost development in the global south? I'm pleased to be joined from Johannesburg, South Africa by Professor David Monyae, Director of the Center for China-Africa Studies. Professor Monyae, thank you very much for joining us. Now, this year's theme is BRICS and Africa, Partnership for Mutually Accelerated Growth, Sustainable Development and Inclusive Multilateralism. What can people take away from it for the average African person? What can they expect from this meeting?
I think put it simply is that the post-1945 world order, which is US Western world dominated, has never prioritized the African continent. For all these decades, Africa has been in the margins, in the periphery, and therefore there hasn't been any concerted effort by big powers to ensure that Africa is involved. And therefore the rise of BRICS, which comes at the backdrop of other initiatives within Global South, mainly the Bandung Conference of 1955, the rise of the non-alignment movement, the Group of 77 plus China, and now BRICS. I think with the end of Cold War and now all other Global South initiatives has been declining. BRICS is emerging as a much more stronger counterweighting forum, I think, for the Global South, and therefore Africa is central in all of the above.
Well, there was this wish expressed by France to join the BRICS platform for this year's summit. Eventually, France didn't get an invitation. But what does that say about one of the leading developed countries wanting to be part of the dialogue? And what is the consideration of South Africa not to include France this time? Is it possible for BRICS summit to have members of developed, the global north, let's say, to be at the table too in the future?
In principle, there's absolutely nothing wrong for members of the developed countries, the global north, to be observers. The G7 countries do indeed invite developing countries to observe some of their summits. However, this speaks much more volume, mainly that the international order as it stands, it's fragmented. The legitimacy of the global north is declining much faster. I think there's a realization by some members of the global north that there is a need to reach out to the global south. So I think it is in that context, on one hand. The other one is directly self-interest when it comes to France. It's one country that still holds on to some of its former colonies on the African continent. And it is a very complicated relationship with these countries on the African continent. I think for President Macron, the thinking is that perhaps if he reaches out to South Africa and the BRICS countries, somehow he will also be perceived in the global north as countries that are progressive, that are doing something in bringing development and thereby giving legitimacy to the global north countries.
From an economic point of view, the economic woes that's plaguing the world economy, high inflation, including African currencies this year, having lost ground against the US dollar. So what do you perceive to be the most important discussion to be had during this year's BRICS summit, and the impact the discussion may entail for the tangible, livelihood of people in BRICS countries?
The BRICS 2023, I think, will go down in history as one of the major turning point, not just for BRICS countries, but for global politics. I think what we are seeing is a fast change taking place in which the emerging powers are setting themselves, but far beyond setting themselves. I think what we are seeing is that this summit will take place in the backdrop of ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict on one hand, that is bringing geopolitics tensions affecting Africa in itself. It's affecting the food security, for instance, and the whole issue of grain trade using the Black Sea. It's becoming a major center, and Africa has also been involved in this. And we also see the trade wars that United States started, particularly targeting China. And then this is worsening the way in which global politics plays. And also, we also have seen the rise of blocs that are targeted towards specific countries in the South China Sea, and a number of other initiatives that do not bring a global peace and security. And therefore, when BRICS deliberate this year, I think the chances are extremely high that they're going to really discuss some of these issues to strengthen the voice of the global South. But more exciting is the number of countries that are keen to join BRICS. I think we have Saudi Arabia, we have Iran, Argentina, Algeria, Egypt, and quite a number of other countries. And more countries are coming. I think in my own predictions, chances are extremely high that the original members of BRICS will indeed discuss the mechanisms and methods of really admitting, because as it stands, BRICS does not have a clear-cut ways of bringing in new members. And therefore, I think we're expecting them to come welcomed and given a phased-out approach and given clear method that they are going to use, that they agree upon as members of BRICS, and then admit members gradually. It won't be a big bang approach in my own prediction.
What are attracting these countries to be part of the BRICS platform? There are more and more countries which have expressed explicit interest of being part of the group and enjoying part of the benefits and be part of the action. For instance, Egypt. What is drawing these countries to the BRICS?
I think the first major reason for most countries wanting to join, I think it is to do with their lack of confidence, trust in the current international order. I think they have observed the manner in which conflicts are handled, the manner in which trade, and they themselves within their own countries and regions are treated at a global level by big powers. It's not in line with their own developmental goals. And therefore, BRICS, it's much more promising, having the future lies not just in Asia, but in the developing world. More population, different civilizations. And therefore, I think all countries wants to see their civilizations, they want to see their people being treated as equal at a global level. By equal means the democratization of these institutions without having a singular power or a region dominating all aspects of life in international relations. And therefore, it's a call yearning for freedom and development by these countries.
What about the over-dependency of these countries traditionally on the US dollar?
The dollar is also created a lot of crisis for developing countries, that there has been the weaponization of the dollar by United States, and the kind of actions that United States in terms of sanctions, the abuse of global public goods such as SWIFT, in excluding some countries, and all this has brought countries to really think in terms of how they can trade without having the dollar to mediate that trade. And therefore, I think there has been much talk about BRICS currencies. I think that talk, in my own view, is that it's going to also be a gradual approach. Creating a BRICS currency, it's quite complicated, but one is expecting much more the trade among BRICS countries in their own local currency to really take a stage. That in itself undermines the dollar. And the rise of technology, particularly digital currency, I think that is one of the greatest fear in Washington, that more and more trade, global trade, will take place without the dollar being at the center of every trade we take in the world.
Right. Well, finally, this year marks 25 years of diplomacy between China and South Africa. Trade has grown exponentially since diplomatic ties were established in 1998, from 1.4 billion to 60 billion by 2022. China has been the largest trading partner of South Africa for 14 years in a row, and South Africa is China's top trading partner in Africa for 13 consecutive years. So what benefits has that brought to the South African economy, and how is the momentum now?
The momentum, I think it's moving quite steadily. I think what you have seen with China-South Africa trade, it has also ripple effect in the region, within SADC region and across the African continent. You have a number of Chinese companies that are in South Africa, creating employment. China, South Africa, I think the relationship, we also have seen massive movement of students being trained within Chinese universities. We have seen cooperation between the two countries going in other areas, whether it is in terms of cooperation around issues of vaccine, as we have seen throughout the pandemic, through the AU. China has played a critical role, and therefore I think South Africa will continue to be a key player on the African continent, and therefore I think its cooperation with China will not only benefit South Africa, but the entire continent.
We have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Professor David Monyae, Director of the Center for China-Africa Studies, joining me from Johannesburg, South Africa. With that, we come to this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.